Nigel Farage is a snake oil salesman of British politics, and it's time to stop buying what he's selling.
Reform UK has become Britain's largest party after overtaking Labour. That is according to the Times newspaper.
And his party have been in Parliament for less than a year, and yet they have already racked up £80 billion of unfunded commitments.
People point at me and say, you are the last chance we've got to get this country back on track. We are the last chance.
Whether you love him or hate him, Farage and Reform UK are practically taking over politics. But do they have a hidden agenda? Are they really for the working class? Trust me, you're going to want to stay tuned and hear the actual truth. Now, I'm not going to talk about how Farage went to private school or how he worked as a city trader, because privilege doesn't make him a bad person. The first thing I'm actually going to look at is when he stepped into politics. Then we're going to have a look at some big issues with him and Reform, and then discuss their main policies. Now, going back to his career, Nigel had been a card-carrying member of the Conservative Party since he was a teenager. And in 1992, everything changed when the government signed the Maastricht Treaty, which formed the EU in '93. And we suddenly went from trading with our neighbours to being partly governed by them. And Farage wasn't having this. So he joined a tiny, recently founded party called UKIP, who were heavily ridiculed at the time. Back then, leaving the EU was a bit of a fantasy. But he played the long game, and in 1999, he managed to get elected to the European Parliament. He spent the next 2 decades literally taking a salary from the EU to stand up in their chamber and tell them that they were illegitimate. And he focused on democracy, arguing that we were being ruled by unelected officials in Brussels who the British people couldn't actually vote out. But during this, people like David Cameron continued to laugh at him, dismissing UKIP as fruitcakes, loonies, closet racists. But Farage was actually stealing their voters, and by 2015 he received nearly 4 million votes in the general election, and with it came a wave of people wanting to leave the EU. So they were no longer a laughing stock, and Cameron was actually forced to call their bluff and announce the Brexit referendum, and well, you know the rest. Following Brexit, Farage stepped down and famously said, "I want my life back." But after 3 years of getting his life back, he decided to move back into politics. And this time he created a brand new machine, the Brexit Party. Their main promise was simple, a clean break Brexit, and they genuinely helped achieve that. And they swept the board in the 2019 European elections. They won 29 seats and 30.5% of the votes, which was more than the Tories and Labour combined at the time. Now, in 2021, after the exit was finalised, Brexit Party was rebranded to the party we know today, Reform UK. And it's gone pretty well for Farage recently. According to the latest YouGov polls, they're currently sitting at 27%, which means they've officially overtaken Labour to become the largest party in the UK. Now, this timeline honestly paints Nigel out to be a hero of democracy, true patriot, and a lot of people clearly think that's true. But let's highlight some things that actually suggest the opposite. Firstly, Reform claims to be a grassroots party funded by the working class. But if we follow the money, we can see that in Q3 of this year, Reform reported nearly £10.3 million in private donations, which is actually 338 times what their main rivals, the Green Party, raised. 9 million of this came from Christopher Harborne, a record donation to a UK party. And in fact, Farage has regularly received large pay packets from wealthy donors, including from Reform UK's deputy leader, Richard Tice. And why is this a red flag? Well, not to state the obvious, but why would extremely wealthy people donate record amounts to a party that caters to the working class against their best interests? Do you not think that these individuals have significant influence on their policies, or that these donations actually come with a few strings attached? I mean, up until February this year, Reform UK was actually listed as a private limited company, with Farage owning 53% of the shares. And that gave him the ability to run the party like a business, firing and hiring members at will. They only changed from this after pretty heavy criticism. But Farage is no stranger to chasing the money. GB News pays him nearly £100,000 a month for 32 hours of him on his very own show. Now, GB News is owned by Sir Paul Marshall, the ultra-rich hedge fund founder who benefited massively from Brexit due to market instability. In 2018, Marshall declared that he had £1.4 billion of declared short positions in the UK. And to simplify this, he was basically betting against our country. And whilst we're on the topic of GB News, recent analysis has actually showed that there was a 900% increase in inflammatory language relating to migrants between 2024 and 2025, constantly mentioning migrants committing crime, even though there aren't actually any stats currently that show migrants committing crime at a higher rate than UK citizens. Is this a company that should be heavily involved in politics? No. And it's not just about the money, it's what he does when he actually has the job. Farage was elected MP for Clacton in July 2024, but since then he's faced repeated questions about how much time he's actually spending there, with multiple trips to the US, including a £32,000 trip to see Donald Trump, paid for by, again, Christopher Harborne. So again, it's the same pattern. The man of the people image, paid for by millionaires and billionaires, not actually showing up for the people who voted for him to help them. Now, let's also talk about Reform's vetting. During the 2024 election campaign, they were forced to remove more than 100 candidates, with more than a dozen removed after offensive or racist comments were revealed. And it wasn't just bad jokes, they were repeated rows over racist, homophobic, anti-Semitic material, plus activists and candidates caught saying things that most parties would treat as instant disqualification. Now, Reform's line was that these people were stitched up or that the snap election made vetting harder, but the sheer volume of this tells you something about the type of movement that's being built. So ask yourself this: is this an accident or is it useful? Because if you want a loud, hyper-online base that will campaign for you day and night, the easiest fuel is fear, scapegoats, and this culture war outrage that we see all of the time online. Once you start signalling that you'll tolerate it, you'll attract more of it. And then there is the Russia angle. Farage has publicly claimed that the EU and NATO provoked Russia into invading Ukraine. It's a line that's been heavily criticised for echoing Kremlin-friendly framing. And long before that, he said that he admired Putin as an operator, calling the way that he handled Syria brilliant. And it gets worse. Nathan Gill, you've probably heard of him in the news, former leader of Reform UK Wales, was jailed last month after admitting bribery for making pro-Russian statements in a counter-terrorist investigation. Reform condemned it, but the story still lands. For a party that sells itself as patriotic, there is a weird amount of friendliness to hostile states. Now, let's just take a second to breathe, because that is a lot to take in. Next up, we're going to look at some of Reform's policies themselves. Now, there are a few good things that they want to do, such as lifting the income tax thresholds. This needed to happen to keep up with the rate of inflation, and genuinely I think it's disgusting that Labour have decided to freeze them. It's a stealth tax. They also want to build more houses through fast-tracking planning and prioritising brownfield sites, but they don't actually have a target yet for the number of houses that they want to build. They also want to ensure that the NHS waiting lists are a thing of the past, but partly want to achieve this through back office cuts when the NHS are already incredibly strained, so I'm not sure how realistic this is. Now, I'm not going to get into the big immigration argument because it would just take too long, but don't worry, I already made an extensive video on it if you're interested, and I'll link it somewhere up here. Here is the first sticking point, where the whole working class story starts to wobble. Alongside these popular headlines are massive tax breaks that obviously favour people with assets. Big stamp duty cuts, inheritance tax removed for estates under 2 million, and corporation tax down to 20% and then 15%. And Reform say it all adds up because they're going to scrap net zero costs, slash government waste, and limit benefits. They're also planning to stop non-essential migration, but it doesn't add up, in fact, nowhere near. The Institute of Fiscal Studies looked at the package and said bluntly that the savings are overstated and the costs are understated by billions of pounds a year. And they also said that the NHS waiting list pledge is near impossible. And this isn't just his opponents talking. In late 2025, Farage and Tice started describing key tax pledges like the 20k threshold as an aspiration, shifting the emphasis to spending cuts first. So yeah, they've thrown out a few crowd pleasers, snuck in some policies to massively benefit the rich, realised that they couldn't afford the crowd pleasers, and are already backpedaling. And honestly, why do people not notice this? Because they're too busy being angry about immigration, the thing that they talk about 90% of the time. Guys, I hope this was an eye-opener for you. Whoever you decide to vote for, please just take some time to research their policies. Have a think. Is it realistic? Is it based on evidence? Who does it actually benefit? And as always, thanks for watching.